Worldwide Pants proudly presents
The Late Show with David Letterman.
Worldwide Pants, the most trusted name in pants and entertainment and pants.
Carter was great, and Carter, I'll never forget the first time I met Carter. He had just started with the New York Times, and we were competing with Arsenio Hall. And it was a Monday night, and in the Sunday Times, Arsenio took out it was when he first started, took out a full-page ad in the Sunday Times in the Arts and Leisure section.
Yep.
And in that same section, Bill Carter wrote a very favorable review. All right. The next night, I'm at a party at the Russian Tea Room for Billy Crystal had done a special called The Midnight Train to Moscow, where he went to see his relatives in Russia.
Yeah.
And so they had the premiere at the Russian Tea Room. And somebody introduces me to Carter. And I was a little drunk on vodka, and I just laced into him. I go, what kind of fucking paper do you call that New York Times?
No
Like,
kidding.
you have a favorable review for Arsenio Hall, and it's a full-page ad. What kind of fucking rag are you running there? Blah, blah, blah. And I just berate Carter. I'm screaming at him, ask him about it. And I'm screaming at him. I get home that night, and I realize what I've done. So the next day I call Carter and I go, Bill, I had a few too many drinks. I say, I love the New York Times. You seem like a lovely guy. I hope we have a long and fruitful relationship. He goes, I found it very entertaining. Don't worry about it. And we became friends after that.
Well, here's the thing. Johnny did not want to get involved. He was an NBC guy. He was very close to Bob Wright, head of NBC at the time. They traveled together. They were very close friends. So he did not want to elbow his way into this conversation. He was clearly a supporter of Dave's. People knew that, but he didn't want to say it. He'd had conflict with Leno over his crazy manager, all of that. But he wanted to steer clear of it. So I really needed him for a couple of things in this. Especially, I needed him to confirm his conversation with Dave, which was the ultimate conversation with Dave. I needed that really badly.
Yeah.
I needed his side of the conversation. I had Dave's side. I needed his side. So
As a reporter, right? Like
yes, I'm doing a narrative. I can write the story and say David Letterman says this happened. I can do that. But if both people tell me, I can just redo the conversation because now I have the evidence of both sides.
Yes.
So I need both.
Yes.
So how am I going to get Carson? Well, I made an appeal to his lawyer, Ed Hookstratton.
Yep.
The Hook. And Hookstratton seemed to want to not necessarily help me, but to kind of be a player in it. Like he liked being involved. And we had a couple of lunches at the Grill in Beverly Hills, which was Johnny's favorite restaurant. Just me and Hookstratton. And I basically, was trying to see if he could. And he said, "Well, I'll ask Johnny, and it's going to be hard." And he wasn't making any commitments. And finally, he said, "Why don't you type up a list of questions, and maybe I'll get them to Johnny, and maybe he might respond to some of that if he knows what you want to ask." And I said, so he'll send me back written answers. That's not really what I'd like, but it's better than nothing.
Absolutely.
So I had this strategy because I thought, I know one thing that may get Johnny's real interest, and that was a story that Dave told me. And Dave told me this story that about, I don't know, 2-3 years into his late night show on NBC, when he's a phenomenon and he's on the cover of Rolling Stone and all this is happening for him, he's in his office one day and his assistant says that Johnny's then lawyer, Bombastic Bushkin, Henry Bushkin, has come to see Dave. And that was not unusual because the Carson Productions had a very small piece of Letterman's show, like 5% or something. And Johnny always Dave played fealty to Johnny, always. So his lawyer's here. Okay, I'll talk to him. So Bushkin comes in, Bushkin sits down and tells him, we are so impressed. You're doing great. It's fantastic. All this tension, blah, blah, blah. But, we think, we'd like to line you up and sign you up to Carson Productions now. We'll sign you up because then when Johnny does retire, you'll be in line to get the show. And Dave starts to wonder about this. And he says,
something hinky going on.
Yeah. Does Johnny know about this? And Bushkin says, well, no, I haven't discussed it with him yet, but I think this is a great idea for both of us. And immediately Dave was like, this is a fire I do not want to be anywhere near.
Yeah.
And he basically says, well, okay, I'll put you in touch with my manager, Jack Rollins. And you guys can talk about it. I'm going to steer clear of this, but why don't we set up a thing? And then he leaves, and Dave tells his assistant, never let that guy in the office again, basically. So I had this story, right? And I thought, I wonder if Johnny knows that happened.
Oh.
Because Johnny had by then had a massive falling out with Bushkin, who he said robbed him and all that.
Yeah.
So in my questions, I include. So I heard from Dave that there was this thing where Bushkin showed up and offered him the Tonight Show to succeed you, right? And that was one of my questions. And I had I tried not to do too many. Maybe I did 10, right?
That's not a question, Bill. That's a trail of breadcrumbs right there. That's genius on your part to do that.
Well, I was desperate. I really wanted to talk to him. So I send it off to Hookstratton, and Hookstratton says, okay, I'll get these to Johnny. Do not expect him to come back quickly. He may never respond.
Right.
He may say to me, tell him, I like what he's doing, but I just don't want to be a part of it. Just don't expect much. Okay. And it may even if he does, it may take weeks before he decides on this. I said, okay.
Lots of managing expectations. You're basically describing my life with this show right now, just so you know.
Thanks.
Anyway.
But basically I'd say, I thank him for helping. And
sure.
And in those days I used to work from home every Friday. And the next day was a Friday. And I was home and in the middle of the afternoon, and my phone was not a cell phone, it was my line. Phone rings, and I pick it up. This is Johnny Carson.
Holy crap.
You got to tell me about this Bushkin story. And I was like, oh, yeah. Oh, yes. So I tell him that story, and he says, you know how that guy cheated me, and all of a sudden I'm like, I understand that, Johnny. That's why I wanted to run this by you and everything. And I said, I've got you on the phone. Can I ask you some of these other things? And he said, well, I'm really uncomfortable about it. But so we talk a little, and I'm pulling threads out of him in this conversation. And we're going back and forth about, don't say I said that. And I said, okay, whatever. And we went back and forth. But I said, I really got to know about this conversation. Dave says he called you, and he says, yes, he called me. And he repeats it word for word. But Dave, I mean, it was identical. Yeah. And I was like, I talked to him for maybe 40 minutes, let's say. Yeah. And I hang up the phone, and I'm upstairs in the office. My wife is in the kitchen making dinner or something. And I just said, yes. And she came to the bottom of the stairs and she said, that was Carson on the phone, right? I said, it sure was. Yeah, so that's how I got Johnny Carson.
On the landline. You could have been mowing the lawn. You could have been getting groceries. That was the world back then.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, Johnny wanted to know about Bushkin. He was going to hear. He was going to get to me somehow about that story.
Ovitz made it fun because he was the revered. He was, the Wizard of Oz. He was the guy behind the curtain. He was, Michael Ovitz. Oh my God! In hushed tones, we're going to meet Michael Ovitz. And we just abused him. We just used to abuse the shit out of him, and he loved it.
They would make fun of him.
I didn't do it. It was all stemming from Letterman giving us license to do it, and then we all followed suit. And we'd make fun of him. We'd have a meeting with him, and we'd mention that so and so's not treating us too well. They're not giving us a lot of guests, and he would pull out. He had a single buck slip in a leather, little binder that the corners went into the thing, and he'd pull out this piece of leather and he'd write a note and put it back in his pocket. And Letterman would go, who are you going to kill? You going to kill somebody? Is that a fucking hit list? Are you going to murder something? You're going to have somebody killed, right? And Ovitz would just laugh and, giggle about it. And we just used to do crazy shit with him. And I stayed very good friends with Ovitz. And when Ovitz left CAA, Letterman was very upset because, as Letterman used to say about Ovitz, he goes, he's not the smartest guy in the world necessarily. He's this much smarter than every agent he's ever had. This much smarter. And it was true. There were agents all over the place. It wasn't like this was Ovitz over here. He was this much smarter. Which is not to say that he wasn't a bright guy. He was a very bright guy and very cultured and a lovely guy. He loved us. He just loved hanging out with us. He loved fooling around with us and ordering pizzas. And it was the one opportunity I think he got to be a real guy.
Yeah.
He just used to love coming to the show. And I'll never forget. So anyway, when he left CAA and went to Disney, Letterman was very upset. He felt like he lost, his most trusted advisor and guy that got him where he got.
I would tell you, it's one of the great times of my career. If I had, the top 10 moments, it would be in the top 2. Getting Letterman was so exciting. I give all credit to Howard Stringer, who was the president of CBS Broadcasting at the time, and a great believer as Mr. Paley was, who founded the network, who started CBS and ran it, owned it for most of his life. It's about show business, and Howard heard the rumblings that Dave might be available and interested, and then of course NBC made the decision to go with Jay, and that, put it kind of a public, then it was more of a public, I wouldn't say auction, but it was a showcase, a presentation. ABC was in it, I think
Ovitz, one of the greatest setups in history with what Mike Ovitz did to have these courtesans show up. Yeah. Yep.
And the courtesans did, but I was not into the negotiations. That was Howard and the entertainment folks and the business folks. But Howard wanted Letterman, and Howard knew the value of talent. He had run the news division. He knew the value of talent there, behind and in front of the camera.
Yeah.
And he was determined. And I'll never forget when he got the phone call. We were in a phone booth. There, attention viewers and listeners, there was something called phone booths, and that's where you put, they were public telephones, and you put money in them to make a phone call. We were at a press tour event at the, what's it called? The Lowe's Santa Monica Hotel, which is a beachfront hotel owned by Lowe's, which was the Lowe's Corporation, which was owned by Larry Tisch, who at that point owned CBS.
Yep.
And Howard was the president of broadcasting, and I was the marketing guy, similar cast of characters. And he was going to get or make the phone call, or he was told that Mike Ovitz was calling him.
Yeah.
But he was not reachable because he was about to give a presentation at this CBS press event at this hotel in Santa Monica. Mm-hmm. And so we went to a phone booth and he sat there making the call, and when some others were standing beside him. And I can't honestly tell you, Mike, what the signal was or what the thing. I think he just hung up the phone and said, "We got him."
The smile probably said it all. Yeah. I mean,
and we just, it was exhilaration and exhaustion. And I think we just couldn't believe it. Yeah. We just couldn't believe it. It was so great. It was game changing. Getting Dave is, getting a franchise. And I liken it to when Bill Paley stole Jack Benny from NBC. Jack Benny was the Letterman, Carson, whatever. It was not late night. He was a primetime comedy entertainer, had a show, the most popular show on radio at the time. And Paley went out and offered him, a ton of money and a reason to come. And he switched from NBC to CBS. And in fact, I studied the strategies there when we got Dave to see if there were any clues or little marketing gems we could pick up, because I saw it as a similar situation, that it was this same Jack Benny, but going to a different home at a different time. And it was just like that. And I still have the Jack Benny is coming to CBS print ads, in my collection of TV ephemera. So I looked at those ads. I looked at, but it was a huge talent get. And thank you for your nice comments about, what we did and what our team did. But look, David Letterman is a singular franchise player, and he brings his own audience. What we had to do was convince other audience members who may not have been as familiar with Dave to come. The marketing, you target much exactly like a bullseye, and the center of the bullseye is your, use your the low-hanging fruit. I mean, the people who are going to be there. Sure. And the people going to be there are Dave fans, right? Yep. So they're all coming. Yep. So his fans are coming. They're the center. Then you go to the first ring, the next ring, in the bullseye target, and that's people who've watched Dave. They wouldn't consider them loyal viewers every night, but they're certainly familiar with Dave and his humor and are willing to give it a try. And then you go to the next ring, and the farther you go from the center, the more outliers you have. They're often not worth chasing. It's really getting the center and a couple of rings there, and then building the franchise. And look, we knew this was no secret. Dave is a franchise, this monumental shift. Johnny is gone. Leno is on. Letterman is coming to CBS in an hour earlier. This is going to be just the focus of everything. And it was, it was August 30th, as I remember, 93, and on a hot and steamy day. And, we worked all summer putting it on, but believe me, it was no secret, not just with what we did, but you talk about Bill Carter did a fantastic job getting the whole story, and and all of his counterparts and colleagues. It was the press story.
You talk about George Schweitzer, who I knew when I was a Page. He was a production manager when I was a Page, so I go way back with George.
What a phenomenal marketing mind.
Oh, great. Yeah. But the problem, when we got there, promo writers are all frustrated writers. They want to be comedy writers. They all want to be working on the Letterman show. They don't want to be writing promos for it. So as a result, when we first got there, they started trying to write funny promos, but they were never in our voice. They were never in our sensibility. They were always off, and we would always reject, just do a straight promo. Yeah. But Dave provide the joke, and you just go, coming soon on CBS, 11:35, whatever. And they never got it. They just couldn't resist the temptation. So we were getting frustrated with the fact that they always wanted to do funny promos, and they kept trying. So we had the idea of hiring our own promo people and doing our own promos. So that pissed off George, and it pissed off CBS, because they had only allowed it once before, when Cosby did his new show at CBS. Let him have control of the promos, and they brought in an outside agency. So we started interviewing outside people, and I'll never forget J.J. Abrams, who wasn't J.J. Abrams. No, he came in with the guy from Grounded for Life, the cab driver on MTV, the redheaded guy.
Okay, I don't have it, but Don will get it to us in a second.
Donald Logue.
Okay, yeah.
So he came in with Donald Logue, and who's a great comic, and they pitched an idea for a promo campaign that was great. And we had to pitch it up to CBS, and that's no good. And, we never ended up hiring an outside agency, and CBS resented me. They didn't like me because I was the cowboy who wanted to do our own promos. Funny.
And
And now, an important announcement from this network's new Late Show host.
I'm Dave, and I want to be your TV friend.
Same Dave, better time, new station.
Plenty of colorful puppets and peppy musical numbers in it. Oh, no, I'm thinking of the CBS Evening News. I'm sorry.
We walked across the street, but CBS didn't have the full complement of stations. They did not have a full lineup of CBS affiliates.
Yes.
And we had to work. We had to go. I remember going with Letterman to Dallas, to Nashville, to Houston, to Las Vegas, Letterman and I and Peter came along to some of them. You know, we used to do these road trips, and Letterman would get so pissed off at me because
I was about to say those must have been happy trips.
Oh, they were horrible. They were horrible. We were in Houston, and Letterman loves aviation and is always interested in planes. And we're taking the tour of the station, and they go, "You want to go up on the roof and see the weather helicopter?" So I said, "Yeah, let's go." And Letterman was, "Fuck you, we don't want to see what, we got to go and see the weather helicopter? What, we've never seen a helicopter before? Jesus, Morty, why did you think?" And we went to the weather helicopter, and they made him sit in the cockpit, whatever. One of the most depressing days of my life was we were in Nashville, and Letterman and I had dinner together at the seafood, it was like a theme restaurant, called, I don't know, Fisherman's Catch or something like that. And when you walked into the restaurant, there was this gigantic scale, the kind with the big round readout, and, and they put the fish on it, and you'd see how much the fish weighed. It was,
Yeah.
The Letterman says to me, he goes, "Get on the scale." I go, "I'm not getting on the scale." He goes, "Morty, get on the scale." I say, "All right." It's the first time in my life that I weighed over 200 pounds. I got on that scale, and I saw it was like 204 or something. And I was like, I'm going to kill myself. I weigh over 200 pounds. I can't fucking believe it. It was something. And he would, of course, "You weigh over 200 pounds, Morty. What are you going to do?"
Back then, we were full-time into the garment trade.
Yeah.
But it was always my dream because, ever since I was a kid, I loved sandwiches. I dreamed of sandwiches and so one day, I was just thinking, wouldn't it be nice if I can just play around with a deli? To me, it's a dream come true. And so I told May, why don't we just look for something to just bat around with, And so we picked up the Times, and back then there was no internet. So we picked up the New York Times, and we found this one shop that was for sale. And so we drove over to have a look at it. And I fell in love with it immediately. It was not very big. It had a good frontage to it. And at that time, I didn't even know it was part of the Sullivan Theater.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, but apparently this guy was going belly up anyway, because he was not running it properly. And so I said, May, let's just give him an offer and see what happens. Because I said, I think I could turn it around. And so, we literally bought it from him for 30 grand. So I thought it was going to be a part, just a part-time gig, and I would fix it up and flip it. So it was a dream come true. For the first 2 years, I ran it on my, with a crew and by myself. And who would have known 2 years later that Dave would move into the neighborhood, and that just changed the whole, outcome of me running deli. It became a full-time endeavor.
Well,
and it turned into a blessing. It's been 30 years. 30 years.
Okay, so you're there, you're getting your feet under you, in 91, that kind of a thing. When do you start to hear rumblings that there might be doing something with the theater?
Oh, yeah. Well, within a few weeks of the show. And I remember by then I got to know a lot of the writers, right, including Rob Burnett. But when I first heard that they were visiting, taking turns visiting the neighborhood, that freaked me out, because again, as you know, I just did not feel comfortable being on television. I did not like being in front of an audience. And I was really getting very nervous. And so I told the writers, you guys can just go visit the other neighbors. You don't have to visit me because I'm deathly afraid of being on. And of course, Robinette said, okay, yeah, don't worry. But anyway, it was inevitable. It happened. That night, I heard that they were going to visit the copying machine center.
Right.
And so when I heard that, I breathed a sigh of relief because I said, oh, they're not coming over. But then what?
This is the Meet the Neighbors segment.
Right.
Yeah.
And what happened was, instead of just sticking with the copying center, Dave said, let's go around the corner. And then I almost freaked out. I almost fainted. When we first moved in, the building was in such bad shape. I mean, you believe it, rats in the basement. It was just horrible.
Yep.
And it was just a wreck. And of course, it was a big undertaking because it was a landmark. And so they had to make sure that the original fixtures were there. And they couldn't do a lot of changes. They just had to restore what was there. And so, I mean, business literally tripled from breakfast to lunch. It was just nonstop.
I'll never forget when we designed the set at the Ed Sullivan Theater. He was concerned because he was the greatest studio performer ever. A studio floor where and the audience is above.
Yep.
You look right at that audience. You don't have to look down on them. He was never a big proscenium performer.
Yep.
He was never a big stage performer. And here we are on a stage looking down.
Yep.
He didn't have the studio across the hall. He didn't have, so I think he was kind of concerned. We were all concerned about what the show would morph into.
Yeah.
And look, Hal, to Hal's credit, Hal had the foresight to say, this is going to be great doing it from the theater. It's going to change everything.
Yeah.
We all didn't want to do it from the theater. And
did you want to go to Burbank?
No, none of us wanted to go to California.
You wanted to stay in New York, but you couldn't do it at Black Rock. You couldn't do it
do it at the Broadcast Center, but it's on 10th Avenue. There was no presence,
There's no magic to it like there is 30 Rock,
30
right?
Rock, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we when they brought up the theater, we went and we said, yeah, let's try it, And Letterman was smart enough to use the outside, and to use Broadway, and to use Sergio and Mujabar
and our boy Rupert, of course.
Hello Deli.
Yep.
Kudos go out to the CBS construction department. I mean, those guys came in and wired and rewired and wired and rewired over the years. But the transition coming into the Ed Sullivan Theater in '93, there wasn't a control room in the basement. The control room was up in the theater. Yep. The seats were a mess. There was old wiring. So those guys are pretty amazing construction shop, and nothing would have gotten done there without those guys.
There was the Carson show already.
Yep.
There was the Doc Severinsen band, which was the greatest. And what
absolutely.
They did. Paul not wanting to do that, even though Dave had asked, okay, we're going into more prime time when we go to CBS. Can we have horns? I really want horns.
Yep.
Paul, being the hip guy that he is, went as far as he could go by talking Dave into letting him have more rhythm section people. Right?
Yep.
I don't know if you remember the beginning of the CBS thing, we added Felicia, so there's one more there, more guitar there. Then now we have two of those.
Yep.
And can I bring in Bernie Worrell as a second keyboard player? The great Bernie Worrell, who was most known visibly probably for being part of Parliament Funkadelic, right? And being like a great synthesizer genius wizard that he was.
Yep.
And and lots of other things too. He was involved with Tom Club, I think, and like things that Tina Weymouth was doing, whatever that project was. I guess Talking Heads itself, I think he was part of even at some point.
Yep.
So Paul, Dave, trusting Paul, acquiesced and said, yes, go ahead and fatten up the rhythm section and I'll see if I like it. So these extra musicians that he added to our regular 4-piece core band, he gave like a 13-week contract to, as in, let's just see how it goes, you know?
Right.
No guarantees, but let's try it, you know? And sure enough, it's some semi didn't work out with the second keyboard scenario, but we all loved Felicia because she brought a lot to the party on a number of levels, you know, like her vocal stuff.
Yep.
She's a genius with like 70s, 80s R&B stuff. I mean, she brought in material that we never even heard of, and it really changed. It really helped shape the band a lot.
Yep.
And because she's just so hip and streetwise. And you know, and then that was the end of that little era, and then horn started to trickle in, and Dave finally got his way.
I was worried about getting horns because certainly at that time, and it may not be true, but if you wanted to get guys who were excellent players in all ways, those horns, chances were awfully good that they were going to be older guys who did not dig rock and roll, who were condescending to play it. I had a big problem finding the right guys. And number two, there isn't going to be time to write everything out. And these excellent players that I knew in the studio, they're just used to, there's an arranger and things get written out. Well, I had time in many cases, like a feature act, and it was almost always Tom Malone who would write out a beautiful arrangement for me. But, if it's just going to be, Ellen DeGeneres, and I'm a girl washer, A, G minor, you got to just be able to play it. And so it was, I felt a little bit compromising of the freedom that I used to have, but nonetheless, you want to have that big sound. And I tried to accomplish it with the great Bernie Worrell on the synthesizer.
Yep.
And that's when I added Felicia. So I added those two people, but it wasn't giving the pizzazz that, an old-fashioned horn. The other thing that was confusing me was Dave was really asking me if I could kind of update my repertoire. Not some of the classic R&B, but let's, can we not hear some stuff that's on the radio now? Well, I didn't hear any horn sections in the early 90s to speak of. So again, I was confused about which way to go. But ultimately, Bernie Worrell was just an artist who moved on and continued to create. No longer with us, but he was a genius. But I kept Felicia after he moved on, and I just broke down, got a horn section. I could only afford two initially, which is weird when you only have two, because so many chords are so often three part. Nonetheless, eventually we got to the point where we could have three. And there's a brief history.
I didn't know that it was going to be, exactly what I wanted.
You made Paul sweat for a couple days, right?
Well, not intentionally. I just didn't know what it was. TV was foreign to me. I was a musician I had been on tour a couple of times already with Al Jarreau and Cyndi Lauper. And as a matter of fact, it was the last day of the Cyndi Lauper tour. I was in LA. We had just come back from doing Leno because he was the host of the Tonight Show at the time. And when I came in, there was a note that I had gotten a call, call your mother, important. So I called, the hotel had left that note for me, that message for me. So I called her and she said, Felicia, Paul Schaefer called me. And I said, Paul Schaefer called you? I was like, Paul Schaefer from TV, Paul Schaefer? And she said, well, it sounded like that voice of his. I'm pretty sure it was him. He said he got your number from Nile Rodgers. I said, yeah, that sounds about right. He said, what did he want? He said, he wanted me to give you, he wanted your number to get in touch with you, but I told him I would take his number and give it to you so you could call him. And I just said, that is so typical of my mother. She would never give my number out, not even to Jesus Christ. She would say, you know what, Lord, I appreciate you're looking for my daughter, but let me take your number and I'll have her call you. And so I called Paul, and that's when he told me that, he says, I'm sure you've heard about all this going on with Letterman getting a new show. And I was like, well, yeah, I'd have to be on a different planet not to know it. It was like the biggest news ever. And he said, well, I want to talk to you about joining the band. And I said, really? I said, what happened to Sid? And he said, I still got Sid. I want to expand the band. And that's when he told me he wanted to add me and Bernie Worrell.
Yep. On keyboards as well.
I was excited to be in a band with those cats, but I didn't know how to do a TV show. I was like, I don't know what to do on a TV show. Is that the kind of thing I know how to do? It just seemed so foreign to me. I really didn't think it was something that I belonged to, you know? So
right.
I had to think about it because I sure didn't know at the time of that phone call what I thought about it. So I asked him if I could get back to him. And he says, sure. He says, like, how long? I says, I don't know, give me, I don't know, about 5 days. He says, okay. He says, but let's not push it too much further than that because we got to get moving on rehearsals and lock it down. I said, okay, I'll call you in 5 days. And so I remember going out to lunch with some friends of mine out in LA. And I asked Al Jarreau about it too. So we're sitting there in the restaurant. I had Al on one side, my friend Jackie from high school on the other side.
Yeah.
And I was telling him, I said, listen, I want to stay in town because I'm going to make myself meet Janet Jackson. She's getting ready to go out on tour. And I know if I can make myself meet her. I just know I can vibe it into existence.
Manifest it.
Yes.
Yes.
And so Al was like, Felicia, who's in Janet's band? I was like, I don't know. He said, exactly. He said, more people will know who you are on one night, that first night of taping David Letterman, than if you did 10 tours with Janet Jackson. And so I said, okay, but what is the gig? I'm not sure what the gig is. And then my friend Jackie from high school goes, Felicia, you know what the gig is? The gig is every day and steady. How about that, huh? That gig expanded my taste so broadly. Because when I started, I was straight up with the funk. I was a funk girl. I was a funketeer. Yes, I was. And, and I grew up, when I was started going out at 14, 15, that was at the height of disco.
Yep.
And, anything with a groove, black music, quote unquote, funk, dance, rhythm and blues, that was my thing. There wasn't a lot of rock and roll. There was certain songs like on Top 40 radio that just infiltrated into me just from hearing it growing up and stuff. But as far as just, what came out my heart to play, not so much rock and heavy metal and But when I got into this Paul's band, the world's most dangerous band, I was just so excited and open to play whatever was being dished out for me to learn that I wasn't hearing it as someone on the, tuning in the radio to see what I wanted to listen to, because a lot of those songs I would have just dialed it right past it,
Right.
But to be sitting there learning it to play, in this new experience, I heard it in a whole new way. Like, for instance, one story that Paul still cracks up to this day is our first rehearsal. We had run a few songs, we did some P-Funk and this and that and the other. And so then we took a little break and he put on the tape for after the break, what we were going to start on next. And it was The Kids Are All Right by The Who. And he had it blasted, he turned it on and it blasted. And I remember I shook like, oh my God. I literally had to walk out of the room. I was like, oh Lord. I mean, I'm ashamed to say it today, but at that moment I was like, oh my God. I had to go out of the room. And Paul and Will thought that shit was hilarious. But now I love it. I'm like, I got my guitar slung low. I'm like, I had to acquire the taste. And then eventually, like I said, I was so open to you hear it in a whole nother way, and there's a whole different appreciation for it when you actually learn the song yourself.
I got on and interning, and it was for Chris Albers, who was working with Paul at that point. So Chris had been trying to get some writing opportunities going, both at late night and ultimately late show, but got a job then in October. So they premiere in August of 30. I get there a week before. We're doing shakedown shows. I sort of know New York, but I'm still about as green as it can possibly be, right off the central Nebraska proverbial farm. I didn't grow up on a farm, but I had that sort of naive look about me with everything in the city. And so Chris gets a job at what at that point was the Jon Stewart MTV show.
Wow.
Jon hosted the show on MTV.
Yeah,
Chris
with Howard
and
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I don't know if it was just sort of matter of, hey, who's got a pulse? And I'm sitting there in the office, but somehow I sort of take over that role. And so it's technically assistant to the musical director, or assistant to Paul Schaefer is the title for that. And get in there quick. I am incredibly unprepared for the job. I'm incredibly, not only was it my first full-time job after college, it was basically one of my first full-time jobs. And I had worked in local television stations in Nebraska. So my office etiquette and just knowledge of some professional sort of level standards was not where it really should be. And so you will hear me say this all the time. God bless Paul Schaefer for his kindness, his patience. I'm sure there were times where he was like, this kid, and it was at a very stressful time. That first fall, the Nielsen ratings were coming out every day. It was that battle. There was some pressure. Dave was feeling pressure. The entire show was feeling pressure that this had to be successful. And for me to sort of be bumbling around that first fall, and Paul letting me survive through that was just an act of grace like no other.
You have probably gotten the drift, and maybe this is only from super old timers like myself. It's now 40 years since I took the job. That as the show got bigger and bigger and bigger and more successful, of course it grew a little less personal on the office front. Everything was it's too simple to say it grew more corporate and more gigantic, but it definitely was a much larger organization that had its own, inertias and bureaucracies and so on. It was a little simpler in the beginning, and for some reason we could be a little lighter on our feet in that smaller studio with a smaller staff. But of course, an entertainer wants to reach the most people they can, and Letterman certainly succeeded in that way, and many others as well.